I've been working the graveyard shift at a gas station off Interstate 95 for about 3 years. It's not a glorious job. It pays the bills, and honestly, I usually prefer the quiet. You deal with the occasional drunk driver or some teenagers trying to buy beer without ID, but 99% of the time, it's just me, the buzzing of the refrigerator units, and the radio. You get to know the regulars pretty fast. There's the cop who comes in at 11 p.m. for a donut, the trucker who stops by at 1 a.m. for diesel, and then there was the guy I called Gray. I called him Gray because he always wore the same faded gray hoodie, hood up, hands in his pockets. Every single night, like clockwork, at 3 a.m. sharp, the door chime would ring. Gray would walk in, keep his head down, walk to aisle 3, grab a bag of beef jerky and a large water, pay with exact cash, and leave. He never spoke, never smiled, just a nod. It was part of my routine. I honestly found it comforting. In a job where anything can happen, predictability is nice. Until last Tuesday. It was a rainy night, the kind of rain that makes the parking lot lights look blurry and distorted. The store was empty. I was checking stock behind the counter, looking at my watch, 2:59 a.m. I looked at the door, waiting for the chime. 3 a.m. Nothing. 3:01. I remember thinking, maybe he's sick. It was weirdly disappointing. But then, at 3:15, the chime rang. It was Gray, but something was off. He wasn't walking with his usual slow shuffle. He was moving fast, rigid, like he was holding his breath. I asked him if he was running late tonight, trying to be friendly. He didn't nod. He didn't even look at the beef jerky. He walked straight past the counter, straight past the aisles, and headed right for the employee-only restroom at the back of the store. Now, usually, I have to buzz people in. But the lock on that door had been broken for a week, so he just pushed it open and slammed it shut. I shrugged. Maybe the guy just really had to go. That explained the rush. I went back to looking at my phone. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The store was dead silent. Usually, you can hear the plumbing when someone flushes or runs the sink. The walls in this place are paper thin, but I didn't hear water. I didn't hear movement. Just silence. At the 30-minute mark, I started getting annoyed. I wanted to mop the floors, and I couldn't do the back hallway with him in there. Plus, loitering is against policy. I walked out from behind the glass enclosure and knocked on the restroom door. I asked if he was okay in there because I needed to clean up. No answer, not even a shuffle of feet. I told him to open up or I was calling the cops. Nothing. I got a bad feeling in my stomach. Not fear, exactly, but that heavy feeling you get when you know you're about to deal with a mess. I thought maybe he had overdosed. It happens more often than you think in these places. I grabbed the master key. I turned the handle. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open slowly, ready to call 911. The room was empty. I stood there for a solid minute, just staring. It's a small bathroom. One toilet, one sink, one mirror. There's nowhere to hide. I checked the toilet stall. Empty. I checked the ceiling tiles. They were all in place, covered in years of undisturbed dust. There's no way he climbed up there without bringing the whole ceiling down. Then I looked at the window. There is a small window way up high near the ceiling. It has metal bars on it. And even if it didn't, it's about 6 inches wide. A cat might fit through it. A grown man in a gray hoodie. Impossible. But here is the part that made me quit my job the next morning. I walked over to the sink. The faucet was bone dry, but the mirror was fogged up. It was completely steamed over, like someone had been taking a hot shower or standing directly in front of it, breathing heavily, just seconds before I walked in. I touched the glass. The condensation was fresh. I ran back to the counter and rewound the security tapes. I needed to see him leave. Maybe he slipped past me while I was distracted. I pulled up the footage from 3:15 a.m. I saw myself looking at the door. I saw the door open. The chime rang, but on the screen, Nobody walked in. I saw myself talking to thin air. I watched my own head turn as I followed an invisible presence walking down the aisle. I watched myself wait for 30 minutes. And I watched myself walk to the back to knock on the door. The camera showed the restroom door opening on its own, then slamming shut. I don't know what walked into my store that night. I don't know who or what I've been selling beef jerky to for the last 3 years, but the police report says the store was empty. I know what I saw, and I know the mirror was fogged. Whatever came in that night, I don't think it ever left. Most people think the scariest thing about the night shift is a robbery. It's not. A robbery is fast. You give them the cash, they leave, you call the police. The scariest thing is when someone just wants your attention. I work at a 24-hour convenience store in a pretty rural area. We have one of those old landline phones behind the counter that screams when it rings. It's loud enough to wake the dead. Usually nobody calls after 10 p.m. unless it's the manager checking in. It was a Tuesday, around 2:30 in the morning. I was restocking the cigarette wall, my back turned to the glass doors. The store was empty. The parking lot was empty. Then the phone rang. It startled me so bad I dropped a pack of Marlboros. I walked over and picked it up. I said, "Convenience store, how can I help you?" Silence. Just dead air. But not the kind where the line is dead. The kind where the line is open and someone is listening. I said hello again. I heard a sharp intake of breath, a click, and then the dial tone. I hung up, thinking it was a wrong number or maybe just a glitch in the lines. The weather was bad that night. Lots of wind. I went back to the cigarettes. 5 minutes later. Ring. I picked it up immediately this time. I was annoyed. I asked who this was. Again, silence. But this time I could hear background noise. It sounded like wind. A lot of wind, blowing against the receiver. And underneath the wind, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. I heard the faint, electronic ding-ding sound of our store's door chime. I froze. I looked at the front door. It was closed. No one had come in. I looked around the store. Empty. I asked, "Where are you?" The voice on the other end finally made a sound. It was a low, raspy hum, like someone trying to clear their throat without making noise. Then, another click. They hung up. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I realized the door chime sound I heard wasn't coming from inside the store. It was coming from the phone speaker. It was an echo. That meant the person calling wasn't far away. They were close enough to hear my door chime if it went off, or maybe they were close enough to see it. I checked the caller ID. It just said, unknown. I walked out from behind the counter and went to the front window. I cupped my hands against the glass to block out the glare from the fluorescent lights inside. I looked out into the darkness. Across the street, about 50 yards away, there is an old, solitary phone booth on the corner. It's barely used anymore, half covered in graffiti. But under the flickering street lamp, I saw it. There was a figure standing inside the booth. They were wearing a dark raincoat that looked way too big for them. They weren't holding the phone to their ear anymore. The receiver was dangling by its metal cord, swinging back and forth in the wind. The figure wasn't looking at the phone. They were looking directly at me. I took a step back from the window. The phone on my counter rang again. I didn't want to pick it up, I really didn't. But my hand moved on its own. I lifted the receiver slowly to my ear, never taking my eyes off the figure across the street. I didn't say anything this time. I just listened. The voice whispered. It was wet and close, like they were swallowing the microphone. "I can see you." I looked at the booth. The figure raised their hand and gave a slow, deliberate wave. I slammed the phone down and immediately locked the front doors. I ran to the back office and called 911 from my cell. I told them there was a stalker outside, watching the store. The dispatcher told me to stay away from the windows and that a unit was 5 minutes out. I watched from behind a display of potato chips. The figure stood there for another minute, perfectly still. Then, casually, they stepped out of the booth and started walking, not away from the store, towards it. They walked right up to the edge of the parking lot light, where the darkness meets the pavement, and they just stopped. When the police cruiser finally pulled in, lights flashing, the figure was gone. The cops checked the area. They checked the phone booth. The receiver was still dangling off the hook. They told me it was probably just a prankster, kids messing around. They filed a report and told me to call back if he returned. I spent the rest of the night locked in the office watching the security monitors. He didn't come back that night, but here is the thing that keeps me awake. When the police checked the phone booth, they found something scratched into the metal casing of the phone. It was fresh. The metal shavings were still on the floor. It was a timestamp, 2:30 a.m., and next to it, my name. I never wear a name tag. There is a rule among delivery drivers that we don't usually talk about. If the GPS tells you to turn onto an unpaved road in the middle of the night and you lose cell service, you turn around. You take the penalty on your rating. You just don't do it. I learned that rule the hard way. I was driving for a same-day delivery app, the kind where you use your own car. It was 2 days before Christmas, so the pay rates were surged. I was greedy. I picked up a block of shifts that ran until 4 in the morning. My last drop-off was a package labeled Priority. The address was deep in the foothills, about 20 miles out of town. I punched it into the navigation. The estimated arrival time was 3:45 a.m. The drive started fine, but the further I got from the highway, the darker it got. Streetlights disappeared. Paved roads turned into gravel, and gravel turned into dirt. My headlights were the only things cutting through the thick wall of pine trees on either side of the narrow track. Around 3:30, my signal dropped to 0 bars. My podcast cut out. It was just the sound of tires crunching on rocks. The GPS voice was the only thing speaking. "Continue for 2 miles, it said. I finally reached the destination pin. I expected a house, maybe a cabin, but there was nothing. Just a dead end in the woods, where the trees opened up into a small, muddy clearing. I sat there with the engine running, staring at the darkness. I double-checked the app. The instructions were specific. Leave package at the red gate. Do not honk. Do not call. I looked around. At the edge of the clearing, barely visible in my high beams, was an old rusted cattle gate standing alone. There was no fence attached to it. Just a gate, standing in the middle of nowhere, leading to more trees. I grabbed the package and stepped out of the car. The silence was heavy. No crickets. No wind, just the hum of my car engine. I walked over to the gate, placed the box on the ground, and took the mandatory confirmation photo with my phone flash. Flash. For a split second, the light illuminated the woods behind the gate. I didn't see anything at the time. I just wanted to get out of there. I turned around and walked briskly back to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and put it in reverse. That's when my backup camera screen flickered on. My car has a wide-angle rear camera. It shows everything directly behind the bumper. On the grainy black and white screen, I saw the red gate. I saw the package I had just left, and I saw the legs. Standing directly behind the gate, in the spot that had been empty 10 seconds ago, were 3 pairs of bare, dirty human legs. They were standing perfectly still, just outside the range of my taillights. I slammed on the gas. My tires spun in the mud before gripping, and I sped out of that clearing faster than I've ever driven in my life. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I hit the paved road 5 miles later. When I got home, I was shaking. I tried to convince myself it was just shadows. Maybe I was tired. I opened my phone to look at the confirmation photo I took to prove the delivery. The photo showed the package on the ground. It showed the rusted metal of the gate, and in the gap between the metal bars, illuminated by the flash, was a hand reaching out from the darkness, inches away from grabbing my ankle. I quit the app the next day. A week later, I saw a news report about a missing hiker in that same county. They found his backpack near a dirt road. They never found him. I never told the police about the gate. I was too afraid they would ask me to take them back there. When you work the night shift, time feels different. Sometimes an hour feels like a minute, and sometimes a minute feels like an hour. But you never expect time to actually break. I work in a toll booth on a long stretch of highway that connects two counties. It's the kind of job where you become invisible. Drivers hand you cash, take their change, and drive off without ever looking at your face. It was a slow Thursday night. Around 3 a.m., a black sedan pulled up to my lane. It was an older model, maybe a late 90s Camry, with a very distinct dent on the front passenger bumper. It looked like someone had kicked it in. The driver was a middle-aged man. He looked exhausted, pale skin, dark circles under his eyes, sweat on his forehead. He handed me a $5 bill. His hand was shaking. I gave him his receipt. He didn't say thank you. He just stared at me for a second with this look of pure terror before peeling out and speeding down the highway. I didn't think much of it. Weird people drive at night. About 20 minutes later, another car approached. I looked up from my book. It was a black sedan, late 90s Camry, dent in the front passenger bumper. I frowned. It was a straight highway. The next exit wasn't for 40 miles. There was no way he could have turned around and come back that fast unless he was driving 200 miles an hour. The car pulled up. The window rolled down. It was the same man. He looked even worse this time. His shirt was soaked in sweat. He handed me a $5 bill. I hesitated. I said, "Sir, didn't you just come through here?" He looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He whispered, "Please, just let me leave." I didn't know what to say. I took the cash and the gate arm went up. He slammed on the gas, tires screeching. I stood there, confused. I checked the computer log. It showed the first transaction at 3 a.m. It showed the second one at 3:22 a.m. I sat back down, watching the road. 10 minutes later, headlights, black sedan, the dent. My stomach dropped. This was impossible. The car screeched to a halt at my window. The driver didn't hand me money this time. He slammed his fists against his steering wheel. He was screaming. He was yelling that he had been driving straight for hours. He said every time he passed mile marker 100, he saw the lights of my toll booth again. He looked at me, begging. He asked me what I was doing to him. He asked why I kept bringing him back. I told him I wasn't doing anything. I told him to pull over, and I would call a trooper to help him. He shook his head violently. He said he couldn't stop. He said if he stopped, they would catch up. He threw a crumpled $5 bill at my window and sped off again. I grabbed the phone to call the police. I dialed 911. But before the operator could answer, I looked up at the road. Headlights. It hadn't been 10 minutes. It hadn't even been 10 seconds. He had just left. But there he was, approaching the booth again. Black sedan. The dent. This time, the car didn't stop. He blew right through the wooden gate arm, shattering it into pieces. I watched his taillights fade into the darkness. I waited for him to come back. I waited all night, but he never returned. When the maintenance crew came to fix the gate in the morning, they found something that made me transfer to the day shift. Stuck in the gears of the gate mechanism, jammed deep inside, was a collection of $5 bills. There wasn't just one or two. There were dozens of them, crushed and oily, like they had been shoved in there over and over again for a very, very long time. I don't know how long he was driving that night, and I don't know if he ever really escaped. Hospitals are different at night. During the day, they are places of healing, full of noise, doctors and families. But at 3 a.m., when the visitors leave and the lights dim, they feel more like holding cells for the dying. I work security at a large county hospital. My job is mostly monitoring the cameras and doing rounds on the lower levels. The worst part of the job isn't the morgue. You get used to the dead. The worst part is the fourth floor. The fourth floor used to be the psychiatric wing, but it was shut down 5 years ago for renovations that never happened. It's a ghost town. Just long, dark hallways filled with old wheelchairs and dust sheets. The elevators don't even stop there unless you use a special key. Last month, I was sitting in the command center, staring at the wall of monitors. It was dead quiet. Then, a light started blinking on the control panel. It was the nurse call signal. Room 402. I stared at it. That was impossible. The fourth floor had no power, no patients, and definitely no nurses. It had to be an electrical short. I tried to reset the alarm from the desk. It wouldn't turn off. The light kept blinking. Beep, beep, beep. My supervisor told me to go up and manually reset the breaker in the room. I grabbed my flashlight and the master key. The elevator ride up was slow. When the doors opened on the fourth floor, the air hit me. It smelled stale, like old copper and mildew. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the plastic sheets hanging from the ceiling. I walked down the hall. Room 402 was at the very end. The door was closed. As I got closer, I heard a sound. It was the rhythmic squeaking of a bed frame. Squeak, squeak, squeak. I stopped. The sound stopped. I told myself it was just the building settling. I reached the door and unlocked it. I pushed it open. The room was empty. Just a stripped mattress frame and a broken chair. No patient, no nurse, and the call button cord was ripped out of the wall, lying on the floor in a pile of dust. I walked over to the wall to check the breaker panel. That's when I felt it. A cold spot. Not just a draft, but a freezing cold pocket of air right next to the bed. I flipped the breaker. The light on my radio confirmed the alarm was off. I turned to leave. I just wanted to get back to the elevators. But as I stepped into the hallway, the elevator doors at the other end of the corridor dinged. They slid open. Nobody was there. I started walking fast. Then, behind me, from inside room 402, I heard the sound again. Squeak, squeak. And then, a voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was a clear, calm voice speaking through the hospital intercom system above my head. Code blue, room 402. Code blue, room 402. I ran. I didn't care about protocol. I sprinted to the stairs and didn't stop until I hit the lobby. I checked the logs the next morning. No one had used the intercom, no one had called the elevator. But there was one thing I found in the old archives. 5 years ago, right before the wing closed, a patient in room 402 died during the night. The nurse on duty had fallen asleep and missed the call light. The patient's cause of death was listed as heart failure. But the note said he was found with his hand gripping the call button so hard they had to pry his fingers loose. I don't go to the fourth floor anymore. But sometimes, on the monitors, I see the elevator going up to level 4 on its own. And I know whoever is up there is still waiting for a nurse who is never coming. You made it to the end of your shift. You've seen the logs, you've heard the tapes. But clocking out doesn't mean you're safe. The things that hide in the dark don't follow a schedule. If you have your own story from the night shift, or an encounter you can't explain, send it to the email in the description. We read everything. And if you think you're brave enough to see what happens when the security cameras catch something they weren't supposed to, click the video on your screen now. The archives are open. I'll see you after dark.